The wind that morning carried grit sharp enough to sting. It howled across the flatlands like a wounded animal, pushing clouds low and mean across the pale sky. A fence had broken somewhere overnight, barbed wire coiled like dead snakes in the dust, and the cattle had wandered. But Elias Morgan didn't ride out for the cattle. He rode out because something had pulled at him all night, something wrong in the marrow of the world. His coat flapped behind him like the wings of a crow as he crested the ridge. The horse's breath steamed from its nostrils, white against the early chill. Below, in the gully where the wind curved and curled like a cold hand, something moved. He almost didn't hear it at first, but then again, you always heard a baby, even when you didn't want to. The cry was thin, like a reed whistle, but it cut through the wind, sharp and clean. Elias reined in and stared. There, tucked beneath a brittle cottonwood, was a quilt torn, stained, frayed at the edges like it had been ripped from something bigger. Inside, a shape writhed. He dismounted slowly. The ground here was dry and cracked, like a thirsty tongue. Each step felt heavy, not from mud, but from meaning. The baby kept crying. A broken, stubborn sound. Not loud, not angry, just afraid. The quilt was sun-bleached, once blue, but now the color of bad memories. He knelt, careful not to startle whatever was inside. His gloved fingers pulled the fabric aside. The child couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, filthy, red-faced, tiny fists punching at the wind like it was an enemy. Elias's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't held anything so fragile in years. He looked around. No wagon tracks, no horse prints, no signs of shelter, no sheltering arms. Just the gully, the wind, and the wide, godless land. Someone left her here, not by mistake. He sat back on his heels, heart drumming slow and strange. He didn't want to touch the baby again. Not because he was afraid of hurting her, but because he was afraid of what it meant if he did. But she cried again, softer now, like she was already giving up. Elias reached out and lifted her. She weighed less than a saddlebag. Her eyes were slits against the cold, but she didn't flinch when he held her close. She just breathed, shallow, uncertain, but alive. He wrapped the quilt tighter and stood. His knees popped. He looked once more around the hollow, scanning for anything human. Nothing. He turned back to the horse. The mare pawed at the dirt, uneasy. He couldn't blame her. As he mounted, baby tucked inside his coat, Elias felt the land watching him. Not with mercy, not with kindness, just watching. The wind eased a little as he rode toward home, like the plains had made their offering and were done with him now. The child made no sound the rest of the way, not until they reached the barn and the smell of hay and animals and warm, breathing things met her nose. Then she cried, not sharp or afraid this time, but open-throated, like she knew somehow this place held something she'd lost. Elias had never known a sound that split him open like that. He carried her inside. The house was a simple thing: stone chimney, warped floorboards, a stove that puffed when it should have roared. He hadn't had a woman here in 6 years. Hadn't had a child since long before that. He set her down in an apple crate lined with an old shirt, then sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on knees, eyes hollow. He didn't ask why. The plains didn't answer that kind of question. She kept staring up at him with those half-closed eyes, like she was waiting for him to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. Outside, the wind started up again. Inside, something quieter began to move. The fire hissed in the stove, wet wood spitting. The warmth hadn't reached the corners of the room yet, but the baby's skin was less cold now, less ghost-like. Elias sat across from her, legs wide, hands clasped tight between his knees. He hadn't taken his coat off. The quilt lay beside the crate, folded rough, like even fabric had memory, and he didn't want it to touch the floor. The baby slept in snatches. Her breaths came in small bursts. Sometimes she twitched, like something was still chasing her in sleep. He didn't sleep. When morning seeped through the warped panes, he rode into town. Brought back a tin of goat milk, a bottle, and a sack of diapers he felt near shame asking for. No questions from the woman at the counter, just a look dry-eyed and knowing. He liked that better than sympathy. Days passed like cattle through a broken gate. The girl began to open her eyes more. She never cried much, just watched. Her gaze followed him when he moved through the room, her mouth forming soft little O shapes. No name on her, no note. No sign she'd been wanted. Still, Elias started calling her Fern. Not for any reason except she reminded him of the fragile things that grow despite no one tending them. She wouldn't take to the bottle unless he hummed. Not a song, just sound. Low, steady, something from his bones. It unnerved him, how fast his hands learned the shape of her, how easily he shifted her to one arm while stoking the fire, or set her against his shoulder while washing the tin dishes. He found himself looking for things to say out loud, things he used to keep quiet. She didn't answer, but she listened, and sometimes that was enough. On the sixth day, the sky bruised over with the color of iron. Snow came like a whisper, turning cruel. By sundown, the house was sealed in white. That's when she knocked. He was rocking Fern in the old rocking chair, blanket across both their chests, when the sound came 3 sharp raps on the door, like somebody sure of themselves. Elias stilled. His breath went tight. He set Fern down in the crate and stepped to the door. The wind cut in when he opened it, but the figure on the porch didn't flinch. She looked young, though hard weather and long travel made it hard to tell. Her coat was too thin, her hat soaked through, blonde hair stuck to her jaw. Her cheeks were red with cold, and her boots were worn raw. She didn't carry a gun, just a satchel and a look in her eyes like she'd run out of places to run. She blinked snow from her lashes and said, "There's a baby crying. I heard it." Elias didn't answer. Not at first. "I'm not asking for charity," she said. "Just a roof for the night. I can pay with work." He studied her face. He didn't trust people who showed up during a blizzard, no more than he trusted a dry well. But Fern whimpered behind him, and the girl on the porch turned her head slightly, eyes softening. He stepped aside. She moved past him slow, leaving wet prints on the floor. Her eyes found the crate, and the sound that came from her then wasn't words, it was something older than speech. "You her mother?" he asked, voice low. "Number." She didn't explain, and he didn't push. She crouched beside the crate and touched Fern's tiny foot. Her face cracked not with tears, but with something more painful. Regret. "Name's May," she said. He gave a small nod. "Elias." They didn't shake hands. That night, she slept near the fire, curled like a dog on the rug. He gave her the other quilt. She didn't ask where it came from, but he saw her eyes on the frayed seams, saw how her fingers lingered on the stitching. He didn't ask anything either. The baby slept between them both, chest rising like a sapling in spring. In the silence, there was something whole beginning. The storm didn't let up for 3 days. Snow climbed the windows and pressed against the door like a body trying to get in. The world shrank to the size of 4 walls in the fire's reach. Outside, the land disappeared. Inside, 3 people breathed. May moved like someone used to being watched, quiet steps, small movements, always with her eyes on the edge of a room. But she worked, took to the chores without asking, without praise, fed the fire, split kindling, cleaned the stove with a rag and spit. She washed the baby without flinching at the cold water, then bundled her like someone who'd done it before. Elias noticed how she touched things, gentle, like they might break or remember. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her voice was low and sure, with an accent he couldn't place. Somewhere east, maybe, maybe not. He didn't press. One morning, after the snow had crusted into silence, and the light was white and sharp on the floor, she asked him where he found Fern. "In the gully," he said. "Under a cottonwood. Someone left her wrapped in that quilt." She didn't look surprised. "Could have been days she was out there," he added. May nodded. "She wasn't." "How do you know?" "I just do." And that was the end of it. By the 5th day, the road had thawed enough to show the fence line again. Elias saddled the mare and rode out to check the southern posts, leaving May with a warning to stay inside and a shotgun near the door. When he returned, Fern was sleeping in the crook of May's lap, and she was mending his coat with thread she'd found in the back of the cupboard. He didn't thank her, just hung the coat and sat down across from her. "You any good with horses?" he asked. "I can be." "You stayin'?" She looked at the fire for a long time. "That depend on you?" He shrugged. "Depends if you got somewhere better to be." She didn't answer that. Instead, the next morning she was up before him, carrying water from the creek. He watched from the window. Her breath plumed around her face, and her fingers looked raw, but she didn't stop. The baby fussed in the other room, and Elias felt a sharp pull in his chest. This wasn't how he'd planned to live. This wasn't how anyone planned anything. Over time, small things settled into place. He built a cradle. She patched curtains. Fern began to smile just once or twice, but it hit like spring after a long winter. They didn't talk much about before, but they began to talk more about now. She told him she'd once lived in Kansas, that her mother died in a fire, and after that nothing felt like home. She drifted, worked in a mill, then on a ranch, then ran. From who? He asked. She looked out the window. Myself, mostly. Elias understood that more than he let on. He told her about his boy. Died at 2. Fever came in the night. Took his wife with it. After that, silence was the only thing he trusted. May said nothing, but her hand rested briefly on his sleeve before she went back to chopping onions for the stew. Some days, she went quiet. Her face shuddered. Other days, she laughed under her breath at Fern's sounds, her eyes bright for a second before she pulled the light back down again. Elias caught himself watching her in those moments. Not for beauty, though she had it, but for something harder to name. Endurance, maybe. The kind of grit the land respects. By the time the snow melted for good, they weren't strangers anymore. They moved like people used to sharing space, time, silence. Still, neither one said the thing both were thinking. Not yet. The thaw brought mud. Deep, clinging, ankle-thick. It soaked boots and pulled wagon wheels sideways, made fence mending harder and firewood heavier. But it also brought color. The land, so long pale and frozen, began to breathe again. Small green shoots clawed up through the muck, stubborn and alive. Birds returned. The air changed, softer, somehow, like it remembered something kind. Elias spent more time out working the fields, and May joined him. She never asked what needed doing, just did it. She rode well, if a bit stiff in the saddle, but she took to cattle work like it was a dare, and she never backed down. When he showed her how to fit the yoke on the oxen, her hands moved with surprising steadiness. "You learn quick," he said once, almost without meaning to. "I've had to," she replied, brushing her hair from her face with the back of her wrist. Her brow was streaked with dirt, and her shirt clung to her from the sweat. That night, Fern wouldn't sleep unless both of them stayed close. She'd started teething, fussing with her gums, jaw working at anything soft. May held her against her chest, slow rocking in the dark, while Elias sat nearby mending a strap. "She won't remember this," May said softly. "No," Elias replied, "but we will." It was the first time they admitted something without naming it. That this wasn't just survival. That they were building something. Plank by plank, breath by breath. But nothing in the West stays untouched for long. It started with a rider, dusty, thin, eyes sharp under a slouched hat. Elias found him leaning against the post out by the corral, chewing a toothpick and watching the place like he owned it. "You Elias Morgan?" the man asked. "I am." "Girl here named May?" Elias didn't answer. The man looked him over. "Ain't no law. Just askin'. Fella in Wichita's been looking for her. Says she took something don't belong. She take from him." The man shrugged. "Don't matter. He thinks so." Elias stepped forward until they were nose to nose. "Ain't nothing here that belongs to that man." "You sure?" Elias's jaw tightened. "I'm sure." The man nodded, slow and amused, like a wolf humoring a dog. "Well, he'll come looking anyway. Just a matter of time." He tipped his hat and rode off, dust rising like smoke behind him. Elias didn't tell May right away. He spent the next day fixing the latch on the back door, oiling the rifle, stacking wood in tighter rows. When he finally sat across from her at supper, Fern asleep in the cradle, he told her what the man said. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. "His name's Vernon," she said. "He used to keep me, used to say I owed him for saving me. Truth is, he just liked owning things." Elias stared at her. "I didn't steal," she added. "I just left." "And Fern? She ain't mine," May said, her voice quiet. "But I couldn't leave her behind. She was in the house, same as me. I think her real mama didn't make it. Vernon wasn't going to feed her, wasn't going to care." "You carried her all this way?" May nodded. "Figured I'd find a church, or someone better than me." "You found me." That hung in the air like a thread stretched too tight. "I ain't scared of him," she said after a long silence. "You should be," Elias said. "I've been scared enough. Now I'm tired. Tired's heavier." They sat in the dark a while after that. No more words. Just the stove ticking, the cradle creaking, the long breath of a house that had learned to hold more than one kind of grief. Outside, the wind was rising again. But this time, they didn't flinch. The first sign Vernon had come was the dog not barking. Elias rose early, as always, but the stillness outside struck him wrong. Even the horses felt it shifting in the barn, restless but quiet, like they sensed a storm with teeth. He stepped out with the rifle slung low across his back. Frost still clung to the earth in patches, but spring had broken through just enough to make hiding easy. Tracks. Too many for one man. He followed them to the south end of the property, past the creek bed, to where the cottonwoods grew thick. 4 horses. 3 men. One of them smoked sweet tobacco. Elias caught the scent on the leaves. He didn't go closer. He went back, slow and steady, and closed the door behind him. May was feeding Fern, who fussed and wriggled in her arms. Her hair had grown longer over the months, tied back now with a strip of muslin. She looked up when she saw him, and he didn't have to say anything. She stood, still holding the baby, her voice level. "How many?" "3. Her eyes moved toward the rifle, then back to him. "What now?" "We wait." They did. For 2 days nothing came, but they watched. May slept in shifts, Fern tucked in close to her side. Elias kept the rifle on the table, checked the windows, moved like a man who had seen wolves circle before. On the 3rd morning, Vernon arrived. He didn't bother sneaking, rode up like he owned the land, 2 others behind him, one with a scar across his mouth, the other young, maybe no more than 16, but mean in the eyes. Vernon himself wore a black coat, too clean for a traveler, and a hat he didn't remove. He stayed mounted. "Elias Morgan," he called out, "I hear you've got something of mine." Elias stepped onto the porch. "I got a child who don't belong to nobody who'd treat her right," he said evenly. "That what you're after?" Vernon smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm after what was stolen. The girl, the baby. They're mine." "They ain't," Elias said, "and you ain't taking them. You gonna stop me, cowboy?" Elias didn't raise the rifle yet. "You come onto my land again, we'll find out." Vernon's smile broke, just a little. He looked past Elias, toward the house. "She's in there, isn't she? May. Always did have a taste for hard men. You think she's yours now? She's not property. She's a debt." Elias took a single step forward. "You're the debt, Vernon, unpaid and unwanted." That did it. Vernon's face went dark. "I'll be back," he spat, "with law." "You do that," Elias said, "but you better bring a preacher, too." They left. Elias waited until their dust had vanished before going back inside. May stood by the table, Fern against her chest. Her face was pale but still. She met his eyes. "You mean that?" she asked. "Every word." She looked down at the baby, then back at him. "Then I reckon I'm not running anymore." They didn't speak of it again that night. They just stayed close. Fern curled between them, warm and breathing. Elias couldn't remember the last time a house had felt so full. The next day, May went into town, alone. Elias offered to ride with her, but she shook her head. "Some things I got to say myself." She came back with paper. Legal paper, signed and stamped, naming her Fern's guardian. The sheriff's mark pressed deep into the corner. "Had to tell him everything," she said, setting it on the table. Elias looked at the document, then at her. "And he believed you?" "Didn't need to," she said. "Just needed to see who she was now, and who she was with." Elias held the paper in his calloused hand. It felt heavier than it should have. "You done a hard thing," he said. "I done the right thing," she corrected. At last. Outside, the land was green with new life. The fence held. The cattle grazed. And no riders came that night, or the one after. They had built something without meaning to. And now, for the first time, they dared to keep it. Spring deepened into summer. The earth baked golden. Dust rose in the afternoons, and the scent of sun-warmed hay curled through the house like an old hymn. Life pressed forward, not quickly, but sure of itself. The days followed no grand story, just work and sweat, and the quiet way a life knits together when no one's looking. May moved like she belonged now. She didn't ask, she just was. The garden she planted behind the barn took root beans, turnips, squash, and she smiled the first time a green shoot broke through. She held Fern up to see it, her voice soft with wonder. "Look at you, already growing." Elias watched her more often than he meant to. The lines on his face hadn't softened, but something behind them had. He fixed the roof without complaint, mended the porch rail, even built a new cradle, better than the first carved vines into the wood, though he said nothing about why. At night, they talked more. Not about what had been, about the small things, weather, animals, the price of flour in town. Sometimes they'd sit on the porch while Fern slept, watching stars blink into being. "You ever think about leaving?" May asked once, rocking slow beside him. "I did. Years ago." "What stopped you?" He glanced at her. "Didn't know where to go." She nodded. "That's why I kept moving. Thought if I stayed anywhere too long, the wrong thing to catch up." He looked at her hands, calloused now from work. "And now?" "Now," she said, "I'm tired of running, even tired of being afraid." He turned his eyes to the sky. "Then stay." She didn't answer right away, just reached over and let her fingers brush his. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was enough. One morning in July, a letter came. Rare thing out here. It was addressed to May, but in a name Elias had never heard. She took it outside to read. He didn't ask. But later, after supper, she sat down across from him and slid the paper forward. "It's from Vernon," she said, "signed with another man's name, but it's him. He says he's letting go of the fight, that he wishes us well." Elias studied her. "You believe that?" "I don't care if I do. He's out of reach now. Law saw to that." He waited. "I told the sheriff everything, about how he used me, what I saw in that house, what he did. Sheriff said there's a place for men like that now, a ledger that's being kept." Elias leaned back in his chair, relief spreading slow and deep like rain after drought. "So it's done." May shook her head. "It's never done, but it's enough." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, a button, smooth and carved from bone. "This was Fern's," she said, "from her first dress. I found it in the quilt months back, been holding on to it." Elias took it, held it in his palm like it meant something more than it looked. May watched him. "I want to make it hers again. I want to give her a name that belongs to us." He nodded. "Then we do." They chose Fern Morgan. No ceremony, no witnesses, just two voices saying it out loud until it felt real. By August, Elias had cleared the west side of the barn for a second room. "She'll need her own soon," he said. May helped raise the walls. By September, the leaves curled gold and red along the fence line. Fern took her first steps in the dust, her small feet clumsy but proud. May wept when it happened, not loudly. Just one hand over her mouth, the other held out to catch her daughter if she fell. She didn't fall. That night, after Fern had gone quiet in her cradle, Elias reached into the drawer and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was a silver ring, nothing ornate, worn by time. His mother's. "I was saving this," he said, voice rough. "Didn't know what for." May looked at it, then at him. "I don't want to own you," he said. "I just want you to stay, as long as it's what you choose." She took the ring. "I choose this," she said. All of it. They didn't marry that night, but they buried the past. In its place, they planted something new. The wedding came with the first frost. There was no church, no preacher with holy words, just the breath of cattle in the morning air, the hush of distant fields, and a handful of neighbors who'd seen the shape of sorrow and knew better than to ask for the story behind every scar. Elias wore his best shirt, the sleeves still too short, and May had sewn herself a dress from old muslin and lace scraps, white enough to catch the sun. Fern toddled between them, barefoot in the grass, cheeks red from the cold, and eyes wide with joy she didn't understand but felt all the same. They stood beneath the cottonwood where Elias had first found Fern, its leaves now fallen, its branches bare and honest. The wind whispered through, cold but not cruel. The man who spoke was no minister, just old Tom Hatch from the edge of town, a widower who still wore his wedding ring like a badge. He said a few words about land and love and choosing each other through the hard seasons. Elias took May's hands in his. "I ain't promising perfection," he said, "just that I'll carry what you can't and walk beside you through whatever comes." May nodded. "I'm not asking for rescue. Just a place to grow, with someone who sees me for all I am." Tom looked down at Fern, who had sat in the dirt and started piling rocks. "Well," he muttered, "sounds like marriage to me." There was no applause, no music, just the sun coming up strong and slow across the plains. and a quiet sense of something sacred being done without spectacle. They had a meal that night: roast hen, potatoes, bread baked fresh in the oven. May had cut wildflowers for the table, and Elias brought out a bottle of cider he'd been saving. Fern fell asleep in May's lap before dessert, her breath soft and even. After the others left, Elias and May sat on the porch, shoulder to shoulder, the stars flaring bright above them. "I keep thinking," she said, "how I was nothing more than bone and dust when I found this place. Like the world had scraped me clean." He looked at her, quiet. "But here I am, full again. Not from being saved," she added, "but from choosing to stay." He reached over, took her hand in his, rough fingers sliding over hers. "You made this home," he said. "I just built the walls." She looked toward the barn, the fields, the cradle behind the window. "No," she said, "you did more than that." He said nothing, just squeezed her hand once and didn't let go. That winter, the wind came again, hard and bitter. Snow rose high and cruel along the fence posts, but this time the house held firm. Fern learned to speak in half words and full laughter. May taught her to knead bread, to name animals, to run with bare feet and brave hands. Elias read aloud by lamplight, slow and steady, his voice low and rough like a horse's breath. And when spring returned, soft and sure as forgiveness, they planted seeds together in the garden, not just for food, but for the future, for hope. The land had not grown kinder, but they had grown stronger. A ring on May's finger, a cradle by the hearth, a button on the mantel, smooth and sacred, a quilt folded neatly, never burned, never thrown away. They were not a story of rescue. They were a story of return, of things once lost, now chosen. And when the wind came through the cottonwoods that summer, it did not sound like crying. It sounded like peace.